Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of Superannuated Starman. I'm your host, Sean Ryan. Today, I'll be joined by Chris Duerksen
Hi.
and Cory Braucks.
Lucas.
We first started talking about this game months ago, so this has been in the making for a long time. In this episode, we'll be discussing a cult classic from the Sega Mega Drive / Sega Genesis, that is Shining Force 2. Before we talk about Cory's personal history for the game, let's talk about this game's own history. Despite what you might think based on the name, Shining Force 2 was actually the fifth game in the series. Shining Force 2 was released on the Sega Mega Drive in Japan on October 1st of 1993, July 2nd, 1994 in Europe, and 1 year after it first released in Japan on October 19th of 1994 in North America. It was developed by the Sonic Software Planning and published by Sega. Sega didn't have a lot of faith in this game. Shining Force 2, despite being the fifth game in the franchise, was budgeted the same amount for the very first game in the series. In fact, producer, I'm going to butcher this name, Hiroyuki Takahashi said it in an interview, "We were really in a precarious position at that point because we knew that if we couldn't produce another hit, we would have no future. As a result, most of the development team that had been working on the series up to this point had dropped out, requiring an entirely new staff to produce Shining Force 2. Fortunately,
So you said,
go ahead.
Sorry.
What do
So
you got?
said it's the fifth one in the series. It had the same budget as the first one. Does that mean the ones leading up to Shining Force 2, games 2, 3, and 4, were those like declining in popularity or?
I didn't look at the sales numbers for those games. That's a great question, though. Maybe that's something that we can look at while we take a break.
Sorry,
So-
go ahead.
Fortunately, those fears about Shining Force 2 not doing well were unjust, as the game became a bestseller in Japan and received positive reviews from critics and gamers alike. The game has only increased in popularity over time, finding itself on many top 100 video game lists of all time, as well as many top 10 lists for the Genesis / Mega Drive. Because of this popularity, it has been released a number of times. It was released on Steam, the Virtual Console for the Nintendo Wii, the PS3, Xbox 360. It was a part of Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection on the Sega Genesis Classics Collection, and most recently, it was released on Nintendo Switch's Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack. So there's a lot of different ways you can play this game if you're interested. With that out of the way, let's listen to some music from Shining Force 2, and when we get back, we're going to hear from Cory and his history with the game. Stick around. Cory, this is our third Sega game that we've talked about on the show, but it's the second that Chris and I have absolutely no history with, the last being Shinobi 3. So why don't you start us off, and we'll ask you questions as they come up. But before we get started with the game, I have to ask, what did you name your character?
I named my character Bowie because that's his name.
That's the right answer.
That's what I do in all
Chris,
the games.
what did?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
I literally googled what all the character names were, so that way I could just.
Now, if you leave it blank, it just comes up as Bowie. So
I did not know that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
googled it and.
That's what I
Filled it
did.
in.
I made sure that I Googled the right character name. I don't understand people that rename everything, especially like Final Fantasy games where you can change the names
That is the
of the
worst.
summons. I hate that.
yeah, like I know
Pickle,
people that
Pickle
like
strikes for 7.
I know people that like rename Red 13 and stuff like in Final Fantasy 7. It's like, no, you leave that name alone. That's his name.
Agreed. So, Corey,
Yes.
this was a game that you wanted to play, you wanted us to play, rather, and you wanted to talk about it. What was your experience with this game growing up? Is it a game that you played with your siblings or something you primarily played by yourself?
This is one, I mean, like, it's an RPG for those of you at home that have never seen this. So it's very similar to things in like the Fire Emblem vein, but it's a squad-based like tactical RPG, and it is very much like a kind of a solo experience. Now, my brother and I have both played this. My sisters have no connection with this game at all. And the first copy we got of this, we ended up borrowing from our neighbor a couple blocks over, Cam. And this was really like my first RPG. Like this, like a lot of people like started off on the Final Fantasy franchise, or like some people would say like Legend of Zelda is like their first role playing game. Like this is really the first one as a kid that I sunk a lot of time into. So this one has always really had a special place in my heart. And I think it's still a really good game too. It's not like something where you played as a kid and then you replay it as an adult and you're like, man, this kind of sucks. Like this to me is like a really, really good version of an RPG. And I love it.
Did you eventually get your own copy of the game or did you just perpetually borrow it from your buddy Cam?
I got my own copy of the second one, and then as I was growing up, they ended up re-releasing this several times along with the original, and that's when I first played the original. It was like I think like in my late teens or early 20s, like they had it on the Wii U, and or not the Wii U but the Wii. So they had it on like the Nintendo Marketplace, and I got to play the first version, which is a great game too, by the way. And
Yeah,
so
Shining Force and Shining in the Darkness were both on the Wii Virtual Console.
I never played Shining in the Darkness, but I played Shining Force. So Shining Force 1 and 2 were the ones that I played, and I think both of them are actually like fantastic titles. I think argumentatively, like Shining Force 2 is the better game. I really like some of the characters in the original though. But this one I've played multiple times throughout the years, and I've probably beaten it now close to a dozen times, and this last playthrough was on the hardest difficulty. So
Got a question for you. Because you have played some of the games in the series, are there any overlap of story or characters?
well, yes, story-wise, the story is basically like there's three main bad guys, I think, like that pop up, some of them in name only or whatever. But basically the whole thing of this game, the MacGuffin, is that there's like these two jewels of like light and darkness, and that they were crafted to keep like the big bad evil guy locked away. And in the beginning of the game, you see like this thief character that steals the jewels out of their little resting place, and that ends up releasing the big bad evil guy. And so in the
Slade.
first game, yeah, Slade is one of the characters. So you see Slade in like the opening cutscene. He steals these jewels, and then it basically causes this big storm that causes like the seal holding away the demon lord, and he ends up breaking out, and so that's the whole thing of this game. But in the first series, I think he's already like walking the earth or whatever, and you have to seal him away with these jewels.
One thing that I never really understood while I was replaying this game, and I'll touch more on that later, and you might be able to add some context to this, is that we see Slade in the very opening intro. And for those of you at home, Slade is a humanoid rat. Think Master Splinter, but instead of a ninja, he's a thief.
He
We
can
don't
be
see.
promoted to a ninja.
Oh, that's a good point. But we don't ever see any other, for lack of a better term, creatures like Slade. This is a fantasy game, so we do have
Centaurs.
centaurs and we have these birdmen, but we don't see
Yeah, I mean,
anything like Slade.
I would say the Phoenix. I mean, oh, but you're saying, I mean, there's an entire race of phoenixes, but where's the race of rat people?
Yeah.
And I don't know if if I don't know if Slade is an anomaly or if he's just not from this area. But I mean, you also get the character Kiwi, who is a turtle monster.
But he
So
doesn't. Does he talk?
Yeah, Kiwi talks. What are you
Yeah.
talking about?
No, he was in the pet shop, wasn't he? Oh wait, no.
Yeah, he was at the pet shop in the beginning because like he was being held
And he's saying,
captive. But like
I'm hungry.
he speaks to you when you talk to him. He has
So
he has
so this
concept of the language.
so some speaking animals are part of the civilization, and other speaking animals are in the pet cages.
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, it's messed up. That guy was just slave trading. It's fine.
Yeah, that's what I gathered as well, because it's clear that Kiwi is a sentient creature, but he was basically being sold as a pet.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so what do you want to talk about with this fabulous title?
A question I have, what was the playground scene for this game? Where did you get your tips and tricks when you got stuck?
I don't think there was really a. I don't know how well this caught on in America. A lot of the people that I've talked to, I don't think have ever really heard of this title.
Oh man,
I think it.
I'd never heard of it.
Yeah, I think it did get more of like a cult following with the re-releases and everything, and like as as time went on. But I don't think really originally there are too many people that played this, and I think that's honestly a shame. I know it was really, like you said, it was a lot bigger in Japan, but a lot of the time, like I had to like find magazines, or it was just like replayability and like going through and like making my own like notes of things. And like there are a lot of like hidden items and stuff in this game, so like you end up just clicking around a lot to see if you can find stuff. At least like that's my perspective of it. And then
And
like as time went on, there was like the game facts page and everything as of like the late 90s too. So
what did you already say how old you were when you started playing this game, or?
I don't know, I think I was probably about 7 or 8.
'Cause yeah, I mean, this game came out when we were 10, so and you're a couple years behind us.
Yeah, so I mean like this was probably like mid 90s when I played this, like 95, 96, somewhere in there.
I'll admit, even as a 10-year-old, if I would have been playing this as a 10-year-old, I would have been lost the entire time.
Oh yeah, I mean it's not a it's not hard, but it's got a lot
It's
going
not,
on.
yeah, well, it's
Yeah.
not a kid's game, and it's not, it's not. I mean, it is cartoony and animated, or sort of, but I mean, it is. Yeah, it's not,
There's a lot of like
Mickey
reading
Mouse's
and
adventure.
stuff you need to do. So
Yeah.
Were there any parts of the game that originally had you stumped, like roadblocks that you just could not get past?
I think the chess event is the first thing in this series that really like shut me down as a child. I kept dying there repeatedly. And I think that's really where the difficulty curve starts to really ramp up. And so I think as a kid, that's where like most of the time it's like, all right, I'm done with this game. You set it down and come back a couple months later and try again.
Did you ever beat it as a kid?
I did not beat it. I remember getting through quite far, and then I beat it later as a teenager, like replaying it again.
And this is also one of those games that I can imagine, like, if you had, even if you got it when you were 10, 12 years old, you probably kept replaying this this
Well,
would
yeah,
sit on the shelf, and you'd pull it out at least, every few
and,
months or something.
and as you said, like it's a very like cartoony title. It's very much got like the Japanese anime feel to it. Like everybody's got like the rosy cheeks and like happy faces and everything. But
Mm-hmm.
it is very like story heavy. Like every you can interact with every character in every town, and there's little secrets everywhere and side quests, and it's very much in the like Final Fantasy vein of like everybody's got something to say and everything's pretty
Well,
important.
exactly. And also, I mean, just from the aspect, like, when I was playing games when I was 10 years old, a game like this where you actually have to get equipment and then constantly upgrade the equipment, hand equipment over from one person to another, the weird inventory system, that would have been way too complex for me, and I would have just been like, I'm going back to Mario.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really have any problems with it, but there were certainly things where you look at it and you look at the inventory and you kind of make mistakes where it's like, oh, okay, like this one looks cooler, so I'm not going to use the other sword because this one's cooler looking, and then it's like, oh, but that one's like 10 more damage.
The
Like
rule of
poor,
cool.
yeah, poor decisions you make as a child. Like, well, this one looks badass. I'm not using it, and it's like, oh, but it sucks,
You
But
said there wasn't much of a playground scene, but was there anyone that you could talk to when you were younger?
well, I mean, I I could bounce ideas off my brother, and like I said, my neighbor owned it, so I could always talk to him because he was a few years older than we were, so we could talk about that. And I think there were like one or two other kids on the block. Like there were a lot of kids in my neighborhood when I was a child, so there were other people that have played this occasionally. But I mean, as far as like the school scene goes, like I don't really remember anyone. Like I would mention this to them, and they're like, "I have no idea what that is." So a lot of it was like local around the household where I could be like, "Hey, how do you get past this part?" And like perks of having an older brother.
Yeah, I was the older brother, so I was the one that my
Had
brothers
to
came
had to
to
sit there and figure it out so you could tell them what to do.
sometimes. But this game is definitely something that I would have struggled with as a kid, like you guys are mentioning.
But yeah, I mean, like I said, this is really my first big RPG. So this is something like just by the novelty of it, by being so different from other games, that like this one got a lot of time put into it. Because at the time, I had a lot of like the more kids games, like I've mentioned, like Ronald McDonald's Treasure Island a bunch, and we had Sonic and Shinobi and Vector
Ninja
Man and
Turtles.
yeah, Ninja Turtles, things of that nature. And then you had this one, and this is like a completely different beast. Like it's got stat screens and inventory and a party size limit and all kinds of stuff like that. And then it's like, by comparison, you have Sonic, and it's like, all right, I got to go fast, and you just run through the level. So as far as like complexity, this one is way above anything else that I had in the house at the time. And I think that's part of the reason why it got so much of my attention, because there was just so much to explore game wise. So I don't know, this one really kind of stuck with me as a kid.
Are you a fan of RPGs today?
Yeah, I am. I really like RPGs, so I think this also might have helped with my development of that sort of thing.
That was going to be my next question. If this was the game that kind of set you on that path of being someone that enjoys and appreciates RPGs today.
Yeah, I think this one was one of them. I mean, when the PlayStation dropped, we also got Final Fantasy VII. I think for a lot of people, that was also like a flagship title in that genre. So I think between this and like Final Fantasy VII, and like we also had like Grand Stream Saga, which is an RPG. It's not party heavy like this one is, but that's another like great title that kind of flew under the radar. And like we did that one, and like Legend of the Dragoon, like all those like weird Japanese imports that were kind
What was
of
the name of that first game you mentioned?
Grand Stream Saga.
I have never
I've never
played that.
heard.
Oh man, that's another like crazy Japanese one. But we had like Grand Stream Saga and like Legend of the Dragoon, like that was another title.
Yeah, I'm
Um
familiar with that.
yeah, but like there were just a bunch of like my mom would go to the store and like come back from Walmart with a bunch of these like $5 titles for PlayStation, and they were all like these weird Japanese ports. And I think that was like part of the great thing about that era, is that like you'd get all these crazy games from Japan because they were just trying to fill up like shelf space basically, because there wasn't really an American market making a lot of titles. And we got so many wild ass games from Japan that we just don't see anymore as Americans. And I do really kind of miss that era.
It was definitely a time where you could explore a lot of different genres that were pretty cheap, depending, because if you were a Nintendo kid and you got an N64, the prices on those games were outrageous.
Right, right. And I mean, it's more or less the PlayStation where it really took off, in my opinion, because there was really no one making PlayStation titles in America. Like there weren't really any companies. So like we got like all sorts of like crazy like I don't know if you remember like Jade Cocoon, or
Yeah.
like I think like the Front Mission series. Like there were so
hmm
many like
hmm
crazy ass titles like Herc's Adventures and Toomba, like all kinds of wild ass games like that I think really were big in Japan that ended up migrating over here.
That's definitely the case with Shining Force because this game, like you said, did not have a following until years and years later. Shining Force 2, as you played it in 1995 approximately, was, like I said, the fifth game in the series. And by that time, it had already amassed a following in Japan, but virtually nobody had heard of it in America.
Right, and I mean, Shining Force came out over here, which is technically the second game in the series, and then we didn't get any of those other titles, and then we got Shining Force 2, so the US got 2 out of 5, basically.
Yeah, it wasn't for some time before Shining Force Gaiden and Shining Force, the Sword of Haja. I don't know how to
The
say that,
Sword of Hajime Majite.
but
I
it's
don't know.
it's basically Shining Force Gaiden 2. It wasn't till years later that came out in America. But is there anything else you want to mention about your memories of this game before we move on?
It's great and I love it, and nothing that Braucks says today will change my mind.
What are you talking about?
Because you're a
Yeah,
negative Nancy.
No, I love this game.
Okay, good. Because I love it.
I've got a lot
I
of opinions, and we will talk about that in a second.
Okay, okay.
They're not all positive, but
I
I
mean,
I would definitely say that I'm not going to just crap all over this game.
I mean, I will be the first to admit that there are flaws in this title, but it's also like a lovely childhood memory, and I won't let you taint it.
see, and I'm there where I wish I would have had this as a childhood memory. Like this, I mean, like this, just literally just dripping in '90s, especially like early, like from what I can tell, a great early RPG with fun graphics, cool story. I like the party system. Like I wish I would have been playing. Like had I been playing this as a kid, I probably would have been playing much cooler games later on.
It was definitely one of the earlier RPGs that I can think of for the Sega Genesis, but by no means an early RPG. One of the
Well, I mean,
first
like
RPGs
like
that I can
in our
remember,
timeline, like because we were 10 when this came out, so like it would have been early for us. Like,
well, one of the earliest RPGs that I can remember playing was Willow for the NES.
oh man, yeah, I didn't play that one. The first real RPG I remember playing that's anything like this was probably what Final Fantasy, whatever the one for the Super Nintendo.
Well,
What do
there
you want to
was
call it? 6 or 3 or?
there was three that came out for the Super Nintendo. There was Final Fantasy 2, which is actually Final Fantasy 4, Final Fantasy 3, which is actually Final Fantasy 6,
Yeah, Final Fantasy 3 was my first RPG.
which is an amazing place to start, and especially an amazing place to start in the Final Fantasy series. But
I
the
think the
go ahead.
first RPG I've ever played was probably like Might and Magic 4, and that was for the computer.
Yeah.
And in comparison, Shining Force, wildly different and very crappy looking.
I don't know if you would consider it an RPG, but I think the very first I played was with my father, and that was Zork.
Oh yeah, well that's
Yeah.
an RPG. It's just text based.
Entirely text based.
You're gonna be eaten by a Gru.
There's a mailbox here.
Pick
So
up lamp, go left.
let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to discuss what it's like playing Shining Force 2 in 2022. Stick around, enjoy this music. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. In this segment, we're going to discuss Shining Force 2 in the modern day. Because of the length of this game, we can't all talk about how we personally played through the game. So, Cory, why don't you discuss your impression of revisiting this game? And unlike the last segment, we can hopefully chime in a lot more about our experiences with the playthrough.
I mean, I don't really have much to say. Like, I don't know. I love Shining Force, so it was really fun to play this through again. And I went and tried to do like all the secret stuff by memory, and I played on the hardest difficulty this playthrough, and I still rocked it. So
How many times did you play through? Just once, or did you do it twice on the?
I played through one. Well, I started the game and then I got to like Grand Seal like falling into the sea or whatever it is. And then I was like, I'm gonna replay this on hard difficulty because everyone else is playing it on normal right now. So
Yeah, I definitely played on normal. Chris, what about you?
Yep, same.
Well, in order to just kind of streamline this a little bit, like I had mentioned to you guys off air, I made a list of some positives and negatives, and then I went through and kind of outlined my progression through the game. So I'll discuss some positives, and actually, you know what? I'm going to start with the negatives. That way we finish off on a positive note.
okay, that sounds great.
So for me, while the character sprites and the portraits look really, really good, I think that the rest of the world is very bland and repetitive, and nearly every house in every village looks identical,
Yeah. No,
which is
I would agree with that.
kind of a sign of the times because there's only so much space on the cart, and I get that. It's just something that, looking back now, I wish was different, maybe a different color palette, some way to differentiate how each village looked.
I was so excited when I finally got to the Elven town because I'm like, hey, it's different here.
Yeah, that's one good point, is that there are some areas that are different, but a lot of the human towns were almost copy pasted.
Yes, totally. Especially like when you start off and like the storyline, you start off on what island are you on?
Oh, I don't know.
The Isle of Gran.
The Isle of Gran, and you start off in that city. Your city gets destroyed, and you have to flee across the sea, and you start a new city. And then the town's on the it's like going to a new country, and everything's still looking exactly the same.
Well, to be fair, when you land, it's all like wooden constructions. And then you give it a little while, and then it becomes identical.
I know, but even like the next town over, even the next town over is still identical.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to say on that matter. Like, your guys are completely right. But
now, and now, in all fairness, like the world building, though, I mean, like, yeah, the towns look the same, but the world building itself, like all the little secrets, the little, like, I like that. I like the world. It did feel like them. I like the map. Let me put it that way.
well, and like they pretty much had like one asset pool to like make all these towns and stuff with. But I really think the biggest changes for me is like when you get into like the castles and stuff, and like everyone's got these different room layouts, and there's little secrets on the bookshelves and things of that
All
nature
the
that really differentiate everything.
all the silly book names.
Yes.
And you're right. And like I said, I understand why it had to be repetitive because of disc, well, not disc, but because of cartridge space. There's only so much room, and they have to do that. And this is a long game, and there's a lot of music, so I understand. It's just I wish it had been different looking
Right.
back.
I mean, not only that, but there's like I said, there's so much dialogue in this game. Like, there's so many like little cutscenes and in-game like cinematic sort of deals that go on, and so much chatter about like what's happening as far as the plot goes, and like there's 30 characters, so there's just a lot like that's non-scenery related that I think takes up a lot of the space in this.
And you're right. And that's the first thing I mentioned, was that the character sprites and their portraits look really good. And you already mentioned before that characters can get promoted. So each character has at least one more portrait, if not two more.
Yeah, because there are secret items that allow you to promote people into different classes.
And we'll talk about those in a second, but I want to continue with some of the aspects that I felt maybe negative is not the right word, but some things that could have been better. For example, moving about the world, the raft was so annoying to use.
Because you kept hopping off of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The river is very narrow and it has several twists. And if you accidentally press the D-pad in the direction of land, the team will immediately disembark. And that may sound like a nitpick, but that's something that could have been fixed or resolved with a button prompt.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. But 1994. What you gonna do?
Going back to some of the color palette issues, the chests are colored the exact same color as the background.
Yeah. Yeah.
I get it. Exploration is a thing, and you're kind of encouraged to just look in every nook and cranny. But how hard is it to make a chest that is just slightly different colored than the rock behind it?
Well, and not to sound, I don't know, this is going to sound weird, and I'm probably going to stumble on my words and stuff. But like, this is a game that, like, this is not an action game. It's an RPG, but it is not an action game. So I wasn't expecting to have to like keep my eyes peeled for stuff. So yeah, like when chests are just the exact same color as the bricks around it, and the only way you can tell that it's a chest there is because it's like, oh man, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, what would you even call it? Like the pixel of the chest? Like I don't know. It's just the texture. I mean, it barely looks different than a brick. But
Yeah, that's my problem.
yeah,
And progression is tied to the discovery of some of these chests. For example, the Achilles sword. You have to have that item.
Are you guys talking about like more like underground, like when you're in like the caverns and the chests are like the same beige as the walls,
yes,
basically?
and
Yes.
and then
Okay.
the temples and yeah.
Because I was gonna say like the chests inside the castles are like brown and the walls are gray. So
Yeah, but that same brown is, like you mentioned, the same color as the cavern walls.
right, yeah, like when you get downstairs and have to like find them underground and stuff, they tend to blend into the scenery much more.
Speaking of finding things, can I throw my complaint in here right now?
Sure.
How are you supposed to find Mithril? Like, if it wasn't for you,
Uh,
like,
through
if it wasn't for you guys,
spamming buttons. That's how.
which, by the way, the spamming process is not exactly. It's not just tapping one button over and over and over. Like, it's every time you want to search, you have to like go through the menu. Like,
No, okay, so there's the option to search in the menu like that. I don't know why they have it there, but you can literally just mash like the A button to search on the ground. You don't have to use that search feature.
oh,
Literally, the next item in my notes is the search function. It does nothing. You can engage the action at any time, and it'll say something like, Bowie has searched the immediate area but didn't find anything.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's really pointless. I don't know why
yeah.
that's in
Yeah,
there when you
exactly.
can if you want to find mithril, you just like stand next to that tile and like push up and then hit A and you'll find it. You don't have to use the search feature.
Yeah, you can just walk up to like a barrel and press the interaction button, and it'll do the
It's
exact
dark
same
in
thing.
here.
This might be a little upsetting to you, but this is my next and last complaint that I have.
Hmm.
The story and the writing, maybe it's poor translation because we're talking about early 90s, 1993, 1994, but the story is very bland and to me isn't very interesting.
Okay.
You encounter a lot of new party members, but they have practically no engagement with the story. Even characters that have major plot points revolving around them, like Slade, as you mentioned, he starts off the entire chain of events for this game by stealing those jewels. Slade apologizes, joins your team early on, and then that's it. He just stops talking.
I never noticed that, but yeah. Like once they join your party, that's all you hear from them. That's it.
Yeah,
The party, like
there's
once they
not really a
join your
lot of
story,
background noise after they're in the team,
yeah,
really.
that's the end of the story. The story is they join their team and then they die a lot.
Maybe there could have been some I don't know, some interaction between these guys where you have secret conversations like we have. This just me thinking about future games. 1998 we saw Final Fantasy VII, and the example that comes to my mind is in the Golden Saucer, where you could have a mystery date of either Tifa, Eris, not Aerith, I don't use that name, or Barrett, if you guys remember that.
I don't remember dating Barrett.
You can. You can have a secret date with him. It's kind of hard to pull off, but that's not the point. My point is that maybe some secret conversations between your team members would have made this a little bit more engaging of a story because there's a lot of walking around and then entering battles, and that's what you do for the next 20 minutes.
One thing I was kind of expecting, like when Slade joined the party, I was like, oh, cool, he's a thief. Now I get to unlock stuff, and there was nothing to unlock. Where I was thinking, oh, maybe he, gets more gold if he delivers the killing blow, and that also wasn't the case.
I thought the exact same thing. So, those are my negatives. I want to talk about some of the positives. and we will then move on to kind of the progression of the story. I've said it a few times. The character portraits and the combat sprites are very impressive. It's clear that a lot of time was spent ensuring that these visuals were interesting and intricate, which makes a lot of sense because most of your time is going to be spent in combat. The battle animations are usually just a few frames at most, but they look great. The combat backgrounds are also varied and they change with the environments that you're battling in, which is a good touch. I felt that the difficulty ramps up pretty gradually, with at least no major difficulty spikes that I encountered. But Cory, you mentioned that as a child, you felt that the chessboard was your first major difficulty spike.
Yeah. Yep.
Chris,
And
what do you think? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I will say that I don't know if that was a big thing as a kid because of party balance or if it was just because of the way the fight actually plays. Because I didn't really have that problem like playing through this time around. But as a kid, I got wrecked on the chessboard quite a few times. And part of the issue that I have with this game is that if you don't use characters, they will very quickly fall behind
That's what
because
my
the
difficulty
only
was.
the only reason or the only way to get experience is by using people. Like there's no passive bonuses like, if they're in the group, they get like experience for every fight. There's nothing like that. So you have to use people to level them up. And if you don't make sure that everyone's getting into fights and stuff like that, people will fall behind. There's
And
no
that's
avoiding
exactly
it.
what happened to me.
Yeah. So
When I started off, I didn't have to heal anybody because everybody was surviving the fights just no problem. So I never used my healer. What's her name?
Sarah.
And
Yeah, so you have to get Sarah up there and smacking things with a stick,
yeah, and then I
or
also
otherwise she falls way behind.
and I was also saving my mage. Kazan, or
Yep.
he started with like such low MP that I was trying to save him for an emergency use. Like, oh, like I'm going to find enemies that like have to take fire damage or something, and that just wasn't the case. So he got super low level as well. So I'll admit, like I didn't get too far because like I've just been playing catch up on three specific characters that I'm just trying to get up to a usable level while everybody else is miles ahead of them.
Yeah, so that's one of the biggest roadblocks I think if you're playing this for the first time through is like having to juggle that experience bar. And I think it's much easier after you've like realized what you need to do. But it's a very easy thing to fall behind on because there really aren't any like random encounters. There's like 3 or 4 in the game total that you can repeat. But for the most part, all your fights are like on this story driven kind of railroad plot. And if you continually like leave people out of fights, you're ending up with characters that are 3, 4, 5 levels behind, and then they're becoming more or less useless. And what you end up having to do is you'll have to like bait monsters in and have those characters get killing blows or hits in. And then you have to use your egress ability, which is what your main hero has, Bowie. And that basically runs away from the encounter and allows you to reset the fight. So it's a lot
And
of like grinding
that's exactly
and
what I've been doing for the last like
yeah,
3 hours of gameplay.
and it's a lot of grinding and it becomes very tedious. So I think as a kid, you get to the chess event and I think I did have that like low level healer and I had the mage that wasn't doing very well. And like as a child, like my first playthrough, I didn't realize like how valuable Kiwi was. So you play the game and it's like, okay, Bowie's really good, May's really good, Chester's okay because Chester's kind of stupid, and then you have like these 3 good characters, and then you have like 5 people that suck, and then you try to win this whole fight with like 3 characters, and you just get steamrolled over and over and over again. And I think that was like one of the first big roadblocks where it's like, no, everybody has to be valuable. Everybody has to, be together. And
Hmm.
one of the things that like I noticed more playing through like multiple times is that a lot of these fights, if you rush in, you activate all the monsters because this is a very like kind of simple program. So a lot of these monsters have like a threat range, and if you run up, you kind of activate that threat range. So if I was charging in like as a kid, I would immediately get surrounded and murdered by like every creature in the game, basically. Whereas, like as an adult, if you move your whole team forward very slowly, you can sort of bait creatures to you and then surround them and slaughter them. And it's a little more strategic and it's a little more kind of cheesy to kind of drag out the enemy
And
versus
the
like
fights
rush.
take forever.
Yeah, and the fights take forever that way too. But like if you do that, like you can really like get your character experience up a lot better in the early game, and then that way you can sort of like rush in without having to die later on. But that's like one of the biggest, issues that you can kind of run into as far as like early game having all your characters dying and stuff.
The baiting tactic is almost required to play this game.
Yeah, you really have to be careful about what you're doing in the early game.
So that's a great segue. Speaking about the early game, let's move on to kind of the progression. I'm just going to outline basically major instances that I've annotated or I noted while playing the game. And this is going to start with the very first battle outside of the castle. My first encounter wiped out the entire party. This didn't bother me or upset me, and I felt it was good and a necessary learning experience because I needed to know how to play this game. I didn't know what to expect going in. And
No, I was the same way. And to be honest, the very first fight, I was expecting my guys to like to steamroll the little. I think that your first fight is like rats or something. Like
Well, you
I
fight
can't
the
even.
little ghost mans in the tower.
Oh yeah, but I mean, but like once you're on your own and you're
Oh,
like,
like when you're in the world map, you mean?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
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 yeah. There's like a bunch of like little rats and stuff,
yeah, and I was
like little
expecting. I'm like, okay,
beasties
I just got done fighting these ghost demon
and the
things.
slime
These
oozes.
these rats are gonna be, I can just steamroll these, and I got slaughtered as well.
but I didn't feel cheated. I felt like I could have won the very first time if I had played better, if I played smarter. But I was kind of the same mindset and thought that I was going to just wreck house.
Uh huh.
So I didn't really try or apply any strategy to it.
But
So
it was a good lesson because like right away, like I hate you guys. I'm like, does the cost for reviving your people go up every time? Or like it definitely taught me that dying is okay in this game.
So that's a good point. What Chris is talking about is that if a party member dies, unlike the Fire Emblem series, which has permadeath for a lot of characters, you can instead go to the nearest church and a priest will revive you for a set price. So moving on, the Kraken fight was really the next big boss encounter, and I thought it was interesting, but for me, at the time, it was very difficult. Most of your characters cannot fly, so they're stuck. You cannot leave the dock. And in this fight, you have one central Kraken figure, and you have a lot of tentacles that will get closer to the docks. And unfortunately, they hit very, very hard. So you have to be very strategic when fighting these tentacles, which don't actually do much for your team other than get you some experience. You need to attack the head. Go ahead.
Oh, and I was gonna say, and we should. I don't think we've actually said like the way that the battlefield is set up in this game is it's kind of like a checkers board
Grid based.
where yeah, grid based, and you can only move in you know. Oh, that's actually more like chess. Like some of your characters can move further than others. Like for example, like your centaurs can move like 7 spaces, whereas
Yeah, each character has its own
right.
radius, basically.
But the reason why that's worth mentioning is because for this Kraken fight, yeah, the dock he's talking about, it's basically like you have this floating, you're on a floating raft in the middle, and then there's these two single pillars that jut out and give little walkways. So like you can't like because up until that point, like what Cory was talking about, like as far as like aligning your guys and baiting enemies in, that all went out the window in the Kraken fight. And like instead, I was trying to squeeze my guys into single rows on docks and hope that the tentacles just wouldn't come up and wreck me because and it was like a boss fight, so like they hit like trucks compared to the fight before it, and it's totally different.
This fight took me several attempts,
Oh, same
and
here.
it wasn't
Yeah.
until I finally used Peter, who is a Phoenix and probably arguably the best character in the game. and Luke, who's a birdman. I use those two to draw the head. Like Cory was talking about, I baited the enemy closer. So the head is in the top right portion of the map. So I took my characters and I slowly moved them to the top right portion of the dock. And I used my two flying characters to bait the Kraken's head closer so that I could attack him from the dock. And
Oh,
that was
see,
the only way I could beat the game.
and
Or
I did the opposite where I literally killed every single tentacle before the head came.
really?
Actually, and well, that's what I was trying to do, and it took me a few attempts. On the attempt where I finally won, the head started moving in with like three other tentacles all at the same time, and that's when I just went kamikaze for the head, and I lost a few members, but I was able to get the head out before it took out Bowie. Which, by the way, like if you lose Bowie, who is kind of like the main story member, if you lose Bowie, then you lose the fight. You can Everybody else in your party can die except for him. But
That's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up.
yeah, I was mentioning that for the listeners out there. But yeah, for my squid fight, I was trying to pick off one tentacle at a time, and when the head rushed in, I just rushed the head. But
Yeah, I mean,
it took a few times.
I more or less played it from the central platform, because the Kraken fight, it's one big square in the middle, and then you have this flotsam that kind of goes up and down, and there's two on the bottom and two on the top, and it kind of spreads out in like a little spider formation almost. And if you hang out in the center platform and kind of take out a lot of the tentacles, the head will start advancing. And I more or less let the head get close enough where I can smack it from like the right side of the platform, and then I'll surround it with my flying units and take it out that way. But it is much more time consuming than using your air units to just kind of pick them off. So, Chris, what was your next big fight after this?
After the Kraken, I mean, the next boss fight after the Kraken was probably the one guy that you needed the special sword for.
So that's
Was it
Taros.
Taros? Yeah, I was gonna say
Yeah.
Tauros.
In between that, though, you have to solve a little puzzle, and that's by using the wooden panel that you get throughout the game to open a path beneath a tree in the town of Ribble.
Oh right, yeah.
I
And
felt
oh my
this
gosh,
I felt this is way too obtuse of a
yeah.
puzzle. I had to
I
resort to what I did back in the day, which was just trying everything from my inventory, and if that didn't work, wandering until I did figure it out.
I resorted to a walkthrough because I was just like, what am I missing here? Like I should have been like I'm like, okay, I'm kicking everything's butt, and then all of a sudden, like I just hit a brick wall, and all the towns I knew there's something going on with that tree, I just didn't know what, because it makes it very obvious that that tree is important, because it, like, if you walk up to the tree, it says, oh, there's a door here or something like that, but it doesn't tell you what you need for it. It doesn't, like, there's no hints there. If you talk to the town folk, they don't tell you anything. Like
Yeah,
I
you get
like
no clues about this.
yeah. And like, now that I know it. But had it not been for the walkthrough, I would have had no idea what to do.
Yeah, this was another one of those brick walls as a child where I'm trying to figure out what the hell I'm doing.
Yeah.
But after you do figure it out, the story progresses and you eventually find Taros. And I thought this was a fun and challenging battle. And I thought at first that it was one of those story wise unwinnable fights because no one could damage him.
Yeah.
And unfortunately,
Did you go in there before you had the sword or after?
that's my next point was that I went in before I had the sword. I couldn't find the sword because the chests are the exact same color of the caves. And without the sword, you can't beat this boss. So this boss, Taros, is this humongous hulking figure, and when you're fighting him, you can only attack his heels. And I don't know what the sword is called in Japan, but in America it's the Achilles sword, and I assume it's called that because you can only attack his heels.
Whatever. But
But go ahead.
also, the Achilles sword is also an upgrade compared to the That's like the first like named sword, whereas before that, you're still using
it's
like
bronze sword and long
wooden
sword.
sword,
Yeah.
and bronze sword and iron sword, and hey, and now I have an actual weapon that has a real name on it. So this
Or
must be good.
if you're like Sean, you have the same dagger that you started with Slade because you didn't realize there's a page 2 on the weapons section.
So, going around the world, in each town, there's a merchant, and the merchant will be split up into two categories. One has items for you to buy, and they're basically all the same from town to town. And the second merchant will have different weapons for your characters. I only thought there was one row of weapons for you to buy. I didn't see the tiny little arrow in the far right and just assumed that it was only those weapons. I think it's 4, maybe 5, and that's it. I was like, oh man, I'm not getting any weapons for these guys. So where I had Slade just had the most basic knife, and I couldn't figure it out. I could only hit for 1 damage, and Cory's telling me, yeah, Slade becomes this badass character, so just keep leveling him up. But I couldn't because I'm hitting for 1 HP every time.
Speaking of, what about Kiwi? I assume
Kiwi's a baller.
he does not get weapons though, does he?
No, he's just
No, he
sleeps
has
with
no
his hat.
weapons.
Throws his helmet at him.
He has his helmet attack, and then once he does promote, he will randomly have a fire breath.
Yeah, it's like a 25% chance, I think.
Actually, Cory, why don't you talk about promotion, the normal route, and the secret items?
So in this game, you get your base characters. You start with Bowie, Sarah, and Chester, who is your main character, a swordsman, and your healer, and a centaur lancer guy. And then you can pick up some friends along the way. Jaha, Kazan, and Slade are your like first 3 pickups. And then there's a lot of optional characters after that point. A lot of these people can be discovered or they can be missed if you pass them up accidentally. But the characters, you get a leveling system, pretty basic, and then by level 20 you have the option of promoting your character. So Bowie is your swordsman. He can be promoted to a hero, for example. And then Sarah is your priest, and then she can be promoted to. God, I don't remember the
A
name.
monk.
Well, the monk is.
Oh,
Is it?
yeah.
Is it?
Sarah's
Is it?
first one is a.
It's like a bishop or something like that.
Yeah.
And then Chester can become like a knight instead of a lancer, and then like when you get Jaha, he goes from a fighter to like a warrior or whatever it is. And then like Kazan can become like a archmage instead of a mage, like so on and so forth. But then
So
there are these
Sarah can either promote to a vicar or
vigor,
That's
yeah,
what it is,
vicar,
yeah.
that's what it is.
or a master monk.
So, and then you have these secret items which you can find throughout the game. Some of them are in chests, some of them are like hidden on these tiles on the floor by just like clicking around and finding like secret
Oh my
items, like
God.
we've discussed. But you can find things like there's something called a vigor ball, and it will allow you to turn Sarah into a master monk instead of a vicar. Or you can find like a Pegasus wing.
Oh wait, the vigor
And
ball's used to turn her into a monk.
yes, and you
Oh,
can
good. I've
find
got
a
one of those.
Pegasus wing, and a Pegasus wing will allow you to turn Chester into like a Pegasus Knight, which is incredibly powerful because then he can fly. And
I have a question.
like yes,
If you promote your character and then later on discover one of these secret promotion
no,
items, you can't do it? No?
nope. So it's a permanent decision, basically.
I have not promoted anybody yet.
And then when you promote these people, they usually get they get a big stat gain, and then they restart at level 1 basically, and you can level them up again. And then they usually get some sort of bonus, like they'll get a new ability, or they'll get access to more magical spells, or they can use a different weapon sometimes. Like Jaha, if you use the Warrior's Pride to make him a Baron instead of like the warrior or whatever, he gets swords as well as axes. So like you can use, different weapons for him basically. Which means that basically if you find like a good weapon, you can give him that instead of having
Being
stuck with his,
battle axe.
basic stuff. Yeah.
So I promoted him naturally to gladiator.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, I never found any of these secret items.
Yeah, but they're scattered throughout the game, and most of them are hidden. But you can find them every once in a while. For the most part, I think like the more important ones are like finding the vigor balls are pretty much like the biggest things because monks in this game are wildly powerful, and you really need them. Like especially if you like get Karna, who is one of the later characters in the Master Monk, she's like one of the strongest characters in the game.
I wish I had a lot of the knowledge going into this game because of the length of the game. I really wanted to talk about this, so I basically just did a speed run of it. A blind speed run, just going and moving the story along as fast as I can. I did have to use egress a few times to kind of level up some of my weaker characters, like Slade, because I didn't realize the whole problem I was having with the merchants.
Yeah, not finding a weapon for him.
Which, yeah, that's on me, I guess. There is the game design, but really that's on me. I should have figured that out. But I didn't discover any of this, and I think that would have added so much more to the experience. Maybe if one of those items was kind of laid out in plain sight, maybe if you were expected to find it.
Or if they had some more dialogue, like a little bit more, or had them tied into the story a little bit more, something to make it a little bit more obvious.
Yeah, maybe if a towns member spoke about secret, maybe they do, I don't recall, but maybe if a towns member spoke about a secret item that could transform your priests into monks or whatever the upgrade path is.
Yeah.
I think it would have been a little better, but these are all nitpicks. The game is perfectly fine, and we'll discuss our final thoughts at the end. But moving on, the next area is Mr. Creed's mansion, which I think is one of the most unique areas in the game. I thought it was pretty cool to be unexpectedly shrunk down and have to play a game of chess by battling chess pieces. So in this area, you are placed on a chessboard, and the enemies are pawns or knights or rooks or the queen or the king. And I thought this was pretty creative.
And they move like those pieces as well.
I just immediately went for the king. I figured that's what you do in chess. So I figured that's how I needed to win. So I baited the king out and then killed him. And most of the pieces are still left on the board, but the fight ends right then and there. What did you guys do?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I only had one playthrough this, so I made it through it the first time. The queen actually threw her face out at me right away, so I just
same.
Yeah, I just killed the queen right away, and then the king was there. I think I killed whatever pieces were kind of close to were in my way, but I was able to just kill the queen right away, and then it was a pretty easy wrap up because then the king kind of got stuck.
So Cory, maybe I should have asked this in your previous segment, but this is where you felt the game had the biggest difficulty spike and what stopped you as a kid. Did you try to kill every single chess piece, or were you
as an adult or right now? As
a kid?
As a kid, yeah, more or less. I think, and like I said, part of that's because as a child, I was playing this through where Chester has 9 movements, so I got to use up those 9 squares, and a lot of the enemies will just end up bull rushing you and kind of circling around you, and I think a lot of that ended up being like, I have to clear this board now because I'm getting surrounded. And as an adult, it was much easier to sort of just bait it out and kind of take out the 2 or 3 people I need to win.
Fair. All valid points, especially as a kid. You don't really know any better at that time. So at this stage, once you complete this fight, you get to choose one of 4 characters. You have Karna, she's a priest,
The best.
Tyron, a mage, Randolph, a warrior, or Eric, who is a centaur knight. So I chose Karna.
The best choice.
That
Chris?
was that the healer.
Yes.
That's exactly where I stopped. I'm actually still the tunnels after the chest fight, or the I don't know, because you get shrunk down. You're in this person's office, which, by the way, like the dialogue, that was a little silly. Told you not to go in that door. See what happened? And like, no, you didn't. I just clicked on the door once. But anyways, no, I did the chest fight, and then when you're shrunk down and you get off the table using the little cotton ball or whatever, and then you go into the walls, that's where I've been grinding that fight, trying to get my characters balanced back up, because all my main people were up to about level 25. Then I had Kiwi, Sarah, and Kaizen. Kiwi and Sarah were both at like level 12 or 13,
Oh, no.
and they were just getting one-shotted by, if an enemy looked at it, they'd get one shot. And then and Kaizen was only like level 15 or 16. So I had some catching up to do. So I've been farming that, trying to get my guys up, which Kiwi's almost there. I think he's 19 now. Sarah and Kaizen are good, but that's the end of my story.
You can't see it, but I'm shaking my head like crazy. So let's take a break right here, and we're going to play some Shining Force music, and I think it's going to be pretty appropriate for the mood where Chris is no longer carrying on with us.
I'm going to get scolded off the air, everybody.
So stick around. We'll be right back where we finish up the rest of Shining Force 2.
All right, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that music. Unfortunately, this is the portion of the game where we had to take Chris out back and put him down. So, Sean, what do you think?
I think we did the right thing. We had to let him go.
God, you could at least like gone with the theme of the game and said that you like swapped me out of the party, like left me in the caravan or something.
Shh, you're dead now.
Yeah, no, just the dead don't talk. Dead men tell no tales.
Before we move any further with this story, I do want to know what you guys use for a party. So Chris unfortunately used the base characters because he had nothing else.
Hey, I got one extra guy.
So you picked up Kiwi, right? Did you
Yes.
pick up May?
Yes.
Okay.
And I picked up some other.
No, I did not. Who is May?
May is a centaur archer chick.
How did you miss me? She's like impossible to miss.
She's like right in the front of the.
Yeah. I got her.
She's strutting around the front of town saying, "Hey, take me with you."
So
but there's one other guy that I did pick up that did finally give me the option to swap out characters. And in the fight that I was talking about where I'm leveling up my dudes, I'm also leveling him up too, because I didn't even realize. I'm like, there's one person sitting in my caravan that,
So
which, by the way, everybody.
Who did you pick up?
I can pull it up right now. Oh no, my game froze. Ask me again in a minute. I got to reboot.
Okay.
So
well, Sean,
I had just about the most basic party members. I didn't really find many other people, and if I did, they were optional. Then it was done in a pretty organic way. But I'm looking at the list of all the optional characters here, and there are several that I have no idea who these people are. But I had Karna in my team. She absolutely had to be there. Bowie, of course, everybody has to have him. Peter was a staple. I got rid of Chester immediately. He
Yeah,
was
Chester sucks.
Why do you guys hate Chester so much?
Because he sucks.
Yeah, he's terrible.
He was like kind of my MVP before the Phoenix took that spot, where because he had great range. I threw a power ring on him, so he was like you can switch between range or being melee with him. Like I liked him, but I will admit the last few fights ever since starting after, well, pretty much like after their Kraken, after Tauros. I think it was after Tauros. Yeah, Chester, like, dude, even though he's like the same level as everybody, he's only doing like half the damage.
Yeah, because he
So,
sucks.
Chris, that's like the beginning of the game.
In my mind, it's like a third of the way. Somebody said a third of the way. I'm giving myself a little bit more credit than I made it past the beginning.
It's like the beginning of the game. I used Geralt a lot. He's the Beast Man.
Yes. Okay.
I thought he
Yeah,
was a great character. Kazan was my boy.
Yep.
I leveled him up as quickly as possible because of his AoE attack was just really tearing those guys up.
Yeah, getting like Blaze 3 and 4 is insanely powerful.
Jaha, I used him quite a bit. At the beginning, he was kind of a tank, and he tapers off a bit towards the end. And maybe if I'd been able, what is it, Baron he promotes
Yeah,
to?
the Baron promotion.
So I promoted him to Gladiator because I never found any of those secret promotion items. But he was still pretty good. He was definitely not one of my go-to characters. He's the guy that I would. So let me talk about tactics. Instead of moving my force as just one giant block, I would split up into basically two, maybe three teams of characters that I would assign usually a healer to each one. And I tried to put a healer, a mage, and one or two pretty stout fighters in each party. And I would push them out in little groups to bait out the enemies. And Jaha was kind of my secondary guy. So if I got some good hits with Bowie or Peter, I'd have Jaha kind of come in and do cleanup.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, since Jaha's slower, but he hits solidly strong, I usually used him to either mop up the dregs or to be the buffer for the healers, where I would keep him like a couple steps in front of Sarah so that he would kind of intercept things for her, things
Oh,
of
see,
that nature.
that's
Yeah.
cool. I never thought of that. I did the opposite where I mean, like you said, like he was tanky at the beginning, but I threw for Jaha, I threw the quick ring on him so that way he could kind of keep up, and I made him a front row person because he's staying there with a battle axe and he could take a hit, and he was kind of like he was my offensive line, him and Kiwi until Kiwi started falling behind. And
Kiwi
I think
can definitely drop off if you do not stay on top of his XP.
and that's also what was happening with Jaha. Jaha was getting a few levels behind everybody else too, but that's because they go in there get the first few hits, and then somebody else would come and mop up and take all the credit. But yeah, I always had Jaha on my front line.
For just Cory and I, we were really playing this game quite a bit. Chris wasn't able to find all the time that we have, and Cory's been playing this game for years. I have tons of time, so I just played and played and played this game. And in fact, I want to talk about how I played it. I played on the Sega Genesis Classics collection on the Switch. And I chose that over playing the NSO version because it had a fast forward button, which I felt was imperative to this game.
Which by the way, if I would have had a fast forward button, I'm sure I would have been right up there with you guys. But I had to sit through each battle one freaking pixel at a time, watching the enemies move around, just spamming my freaking A button, like hurry up, hurry up, hurry up.
Yeah, those battle animations, pretty interesting, but become very tedious once you've seen them for the 500th time.
Well, yeah, if you're grinding XP especially, they're just like, oh god, I need this to be done with.
Definitely. So after Mr. Creed's mansion, the next fight is Zalbard, and he's one of the main bosses. He's one of the henchmen for the big bad.
Hang on, really quick. Back 2 steps. About the extra guy that picked up, because you don't get to have a party of 11 people, right?
12.
And then 12, And then after the 12th, one person stays behind in your caravan. You have to.
Yeah, whoever's left
That's
over sits in your
which
caravan.
for the listeners out there, your caravan is basically your bench and also your inventory space. The person I picked up the newest edition was Elric.
Oh.
I picked him up from the town right before the mansion.
He's at the
Where
Elven Town.
No, he's not the Elven town. He's at the town where they're having that drought and the river's dried up.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
And
Yeah.
after you beat the
harpy or whatever.
the harpy fight in the harpy field, whatever you want to call it, the field
Yep.
to the east of them, west of them. If you go back to the town, then he's like, "Hey, I'm bored here. Can I come with you?" So that's which I think if I would have kept moving forward, I probably would have missed him.
Who's the
But-
female elf?
What, Janet?
Is that Janet? I thought the elves sucked.
Yeah, the elves are pretty crap.
I immediately threw them in the box.
There
When I
are
had the
better
opportunity.
ranged characters than the elves, is the thing.
Oh, and before you guys get ahead, that elfish town, what is the deal with that little time trial thing?
You'll have to
You
remind
guys
me.
know what I'm talking? Okay, so when you get to the Elven Town, there are some hidden trails. Like if you go around the building, like if you're exploring around the outside, because you'll see chests like peeking through the woods, and you can find your way up there and open the chests. And then I found if you go up and around the backside, because like in order to leave the Elfish Town, you can go out the north of the town or whatever. But if you actually keep going on the east side of the town, there is a special little time trial thing where it says, like, hey, see how fast you can do this, we'll save your time and see if you can set a record. And I was like, oh, okay. And when I went in there, like you're fighting this ooze that it's just your entire party versus an ooze on the other side of the map. And the ooze, I'm guessing there's a trigger or something, or proximity trigger, or I don't know what, but the ooze will spawn beasts or something.
Oh, when all the demons come out, is this
Yes,
what
the
you're talking
demons.
about?
Yes, the as you get closer to the slime, because like if you I was using that area, I'm like, oh, I can level up my healer in here just by starting the fight, keeping everybody still, and just casting heal over and over and over and over and over. But I noticed like as soon as I move like 2 squares forward further than like that first little starting area, depending on like what square I landed on, a demon would spawn. It's just like, and the demon would just wreck me instantly. I'm like, there's no way I can beat this.
I think there's just bonus items you can get on that level, because there are like treasure chests on that.
But what level is that recommended for? Like,
It's like end game, I think, honestly.
oh,
I don't
really?
remember doing this at all.
Yeah, there's like a little time trial zone in like the Elven stage, and it's like do it in a certain time frame. And I think if you get it done in like under 15 minutes, you can like loot everything on the map. But there's like I think there's like a piece of mithril back there and some other like bonus items. So
And the fight was
yeah,
ridiculous hard.
it's really hard.
Okay, well then let me ask you another question, because like obviously my journey ended shortly after this. Everything up to this point, like whenever I don't know, I always kind of consider the towns that I'd come upon as like check marks, and they are check marks too, because for everybody at home listening to this, when you get to a new town, you can go to the church there, and that's where you save your game, and then that's also basically your respawn point. If you egress or if Bowie dies, you go back to the last church that you visited. So I always kind of took each town as a checkpoint, and then I never went back to them, except for, I mean, there was one town that I went back to in order to the wood plank thing. Like you have to go back to that town. But besides that,
Ribble.
besides that, going back to a town doesn't give you any benefits, because it's not like the shops. Well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the shops don't update weapons as your characters get bigger or anything. Like Ribble has the same steel weapons, like level 3 weapons basically for your party, and the shop doesn't get any
I believe
better
that's
than that.
accurate.
So like I always just kind of assumed once you beat a town, or get past that town, there's really no point to go there. But now you're saying the Elven town is kind of actually end game content.
Yeah, and I mean there are like a couple of little back
restored items like that where you can go back and you can explore places. Like one of the ways to pick up mithril is going back through locations and like finding like little pockets that you previously weren't able to access. And
See, and
like that.
I love stuff like that in old games like this because it kind of does, it adds an extra depth to the world, you know, and I love it.
Cory, question for you. The shop has an option for repair,
Yes.
but none of my weapons ever broke. And there was
Oh
never
yeah,
any
I was gonna ask that too.
indication that they were being damaged. And I tried using it several times, but the weaponsmith would just tell me that my weapons weren't broke, and that was the end of it.
The first time I was trying to use it over and over was when I noticed when you said oh God, who's the guy that you guys said sucks? Chester?
Chester.
And when Chester, like his damage for me dropped, he went from hitting just as hard as everybody else, then all of a sudden he went down to just doing 1 or 2 damage, maybe 3 damage, where everybody else was hitting for like 15. And I'm like, and I was like, oh, his weapon must be broken, and it wasn't. Like
part of this is the fact that like weapons are so integral to your damage that if you have an outdated weapon on that character, like they will literally do nothing anymore. But no, the weapon thing is for it's for use items. So if you have like what is it? It's like the heat axe, like where you can use the axe and it will cast like Blaze 3 or whatever out of it. Or if you have like the power ring and it gives you the buff, like those have a certain number of uses. And then when you're out of uses on those, you can get those repaired to restore their uses.
wait, I can use the power ring?
Yeah.
Wait, what? Okay, tell me what does the power ring do? Because I've got it equipped on Kiwi, just trying to get him to hit harder so he can catch up.
You can use it to cast a buff on other players. So if you're wearing it, it gives you 5 attack, but then you can use it from your inventory, and you can use it like a magic spell, basically, to like bless a party member to give them.
Will that
bonus to
give
the attack.
Kiwi some experience?
It probably will. Most times when you use an item, it'll give you like 11 XP.
Awesome.
Like
okay, cool.
If you're having problems with like leveling up Kiwi, just give him a bunch of herbs and like heal people that have like 3 hit points missing, and it should give him like 11 XP every time. Like you top up their HP a little.
Use him as a healer. Oh my God, that's great.
Just run around and herb people. And
well,
like, hey,
I mean,
here you go.
Well, and that works perfect because he doesn't use a weapon. He doesn't have a
so you have a big
equipped weapon,
inventory
so he's got
for
4 empty. Yeah, he's got 4 empty slots.
Yeah.
Oh, which by the way, like everybody, just because we discussed this off the air, but just because I haven't beat this game, but like I'm still going to keep chipping away at this game because this is a great game, and like there
really
are games out.
This title.
Yeah, there are games where I will. I only quit games if they're bad. Otherwise, I at least try to beat them. And this is not a bad game. So like I am going to keep chipping away at this game and probably giving little for. I mean, nobody probably cares, but I will probably keep giving updates.
In 2 months, you can give us the final feeling on it. I will say though that my character list, my go-tos were always Bowie, Kiwi, Sarah, Peter, Slade, Jaha, Kazin, Luke. Who's the other Birdman? Screech, and then you had Geralt. I think that's 10. Karna and Road was probably my like basic team, and then
Did you say you took Sarah out?
No, Sarah's like one of the third people in there. And then when I picked up Lemon, I would usually bench Jaha for Lemon because you don't get Lemon until like way late in the game.
So tell them about Lemon.
So Lemon is he's a Red Baron, and he's like the commander of the enemy forces. And Lemon's a good dude, but he works for a king who is possessed by an evil spirit who's the bad guy.
The name sounded really familiar. Was that the guy that's
Lemon's like the big bald looking dude with the chainmail, like
that you fight right away?
Yeah, he's like right when you come out of the fortress in the first like
that's awesome.
hour of the game.
And yeah, and into the dialogue, he's like are we really supposed to, like, you get the feeling like he's kind of questioning his orders,
Yeah,
but
like
he doesn't want to be a bad knight, so he follows them anyways.
Lemon fights for king and country, even though king and country is being
Has
corrupted
gone
by a
crazy.
demon. Yeah.
They went
So
batshit.
Lemon's a good dude, but he basically is like being manipulated by his king, who is an evil person, and he ends up kind of encountering you several times, and you get to kind of spar with him a couple times, and there's a bunch of dialogue with him, and then eventually, like, you'll beat him, and then you can have him join up with you in the late game, and he becomes like one of the strongest characters in the game, and he's a real good dude, and he uses like some cool equipment, and he murders everybody, and he's the best.
So you said that his king is evil.
Yeah,
Does his king stay evil the whole time, or is it just because he's possessed?
it's pretty much to the end of the game.
One character that we've mentioned several times is Peter. Peter is a phoenix that you get pretty early on in the game, but the catch is, initially, you did not have control over him.
Yeah, he's an NPC friend, basically, and he's got the same horrible pathing issues that your opponents do. So Peter will charge people, and it will be dangerous.
Yes, he does. Oh my god.
Yeah, he
And
can
also,
really screw up your formation.
Yeah, and he aggroes people way ahead of time. He never died on me, but he came real close. Like, there were times where I was scrambling to beat the boss, or like to beat the boss area, to keep Peter alive. And because I had no idea like what would happen if, like, what happens if he's not my party yet. Can I revive him if I need to? Like,
Well, eventually you do get control over him.
yes, yeah, and just so everybody knows, yes, I do have control over Peter. I made it that far in the game.
If he gets knocked out as an NPC, I don't remember if the fight ends or if he just gets revived after the combat, but it doesn't really break the game for him to go down. I think you either just lose that level and have to redo it, or he just pops back up after the fight's over.
All right, so let's...
Sorry, I keep derailing you guys.
No, it's part of what makes this so charming, is you trying to figure out what we've been doing.
Let's go ahead and continue on with the story progression.
Because, yeah, what were you guys talking about when I derailed? I was like, wait, go back a step.
We got through Creed's place, and then we were talking about cool stuff.
So Zalbard is the next character, or the next big boss. So this fight, I tried to aggro him, and then I got him out almost immediately. I surrounded him and killed him, much like the chess match. But I didn't realize that it was kind of the same thing for most of these big fights. If there's a main enemy and it's not just a bunch of random just monsters out in the field, if you take out the main boss, it will end the encounter.
Oh yeah, you can finish a fight early by like bypassing minions if it's a boss fight.
So that's what I started doing, and that kind of screwed me over late game, and we'll talk about it later on. But I killed Zalbard. The next fight is another minion, that's Camilla. And this fight I thought was pretty difficult. I had to, instead of moving my forces in separate teams, I had to do a block formation because my guys were getting ripped apart.
Oh yeah, there's all the Pegasus Knights on this fight. There's like three
I
of
believe
those.
so.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, this fight sucks.
And they hit like a truck.
Yeah, and for you guys at home, there is terrain in this game. So depending on what your terrain is, like heavily forested areas or like, rocky outcroppings or whatever, you either get slowed down or cannot bypass some of that landscape. So when you have faster units like Peter, who's a phoenix, he can fly, so he can bypass all those terrain issues. If you have faster units that can move up and you let them kind of get ranged on you, they will become quickly surrounded by other speedy units. And in this fight, there's like 3 Pegasuses that will pretty much just surround you and just ruin your stuff like really early.
Hey, while you're talking about the land, I was gonna ask, when you land on one of the terrain spaces, it tells you like what the terrain percentage is.
Yes.
Now I've come to assume, and I was trying to read the the guide on this online, and I just want to make sure I was understanding this the right way. So, if you are in like dense terrain where the percentage is higher, you take less damage, but you also deal less damage, right?
Well, yeah, you take less damage for sure. I'm not sure if you deal less damage or not, unless your enemy's also in one of those squares.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I should say. I suppose. It depends on what your enemy's standing on. But if you're
Yeah, so like
both,
if you're hiding in the forest or whatever, and your enemy's like in a grassland, I believe you're at advantage at that point because
right.
you're hitting them and you're taking less damage from their attacks.
But then the trade-off is that you're also moving a lot less because,
Correct. Yeah,
and,
you're
and which
moving much slower.
which I think that is such a cool little mechanic for a game.
So Corey and I talked about this at one point. There's kind of a formula that goes into it. It's your attack power, the enemy's defense, or their attack power and your defense, depending on which side of the fight you're on, the ground, and then there's some RNG mixed in as well.
Yeah, it's like attack minus defense multiplied by a percentage of the ground effect. Because like you'll see the ground effect says like 30%, when in actuality it's more like 20 or 15 or whatever it is. And then it's like multiplied again on a factor of like 1 to 10% or whatever it is for the variable. So it's a pretty basic formula for dealing damage.
Yeah, it's not something very advanced, but it can really screw you over if you don't pay attention to where you are. And
Which is
go ahead.
I was gonna say, which is also why, like, when you start advancing in the game, if you don't keep on top of your weapons, like you're always dealing 1 damage because the enemies, their defensive stats grow as you're playing the game, and your offensive stats really only go up by like 1 or 2 points when you're leveling up. So if you don't get a new weapon to bump your like attack by say 10 points or whatever, in 3 or 4 levels, you end up like dealing only 1 damage because now your enemies have like 10 more defense and your offense really hasn't gone up at all.
Now, I
That
assume
was my problem with Slate.
I assume enemies don't scale to you, right? I assume they're static.
Yeah, they're static based on the encounter that you're in. So, I mean, if you want to spend the time like power leveling your characters by running through, egress after egress after egress on like the 5th level or whatever, you can certainly like out level everything in the game, but it's just a matter of how much time do you want to sink into it.
Well, actually, you can't because eventually I have figured out because like some my characters are so uneven that my higher
Yeah,
guys
you'll
like
get like 1 XP or
one
whatever
XP
for killing something
for
that's
killing.
like
Yeah.
5 levels above you. Yeah, but I mean, if you really want to sink the time into it, there are ways to like max out the character, because your character can get to level 100, and then if you promote them, you can get to level 100 again, and that's the cap. So it's a very time consuming process if you're actually going to go for something like that.
Oh man. So okay, we're probably getting ahead here, but if you promote them early, because like you can promote them at level 20. But you said they can go. You could wait till level 100 and then
You
wait to
you
promote them.
don't want to wait till level 100. Just do it
But
at 20.
I mean, theoretically, so your character could be.
Theoretically, if you wanted max stats, you could level them to 100 and then promote them and then level them to 100 again.
So
And it
so
would
your
be a
characters
very
could
time-consuming thing.
you could have characters basically at level 200, whereas if you promote them right away, the most they'll be is 120.
Yeah, pretty much. But like
In
you're never
theory.
hitting that cap unless you're literally specifically trying to grind towards that maximum, which would be a like conscious decision that would take months of your time.
So
This
moving
game
on.
has already taken months.
Moving on, after the Camelot fight, we now are introduced to a new type of hazard or monster. It's the prism flower. And the prism flower is a major pain in the ass. And they nearly wiped out my entire party. So what these monsters or hazard or whatever you want to call them, the reason that they're so just rough is that they have an unlimited range in the 4 cardinal directions. So if you are anywhere in their line of sight, they can hit you. But fortunately, they attack and cause damage to both your party and the enemy monsters if they're in the way too.
Oh, that's cool.
Or are we talking about the the prism flowers or whatever they are?
Yeah.
Yeah. Those things suck.
Yeah, they mess you up, and it takes a little while to kind of figure out how to adequately maneuver your forces to not only engage with the enemy monsters, but to get out of their line of sight and to attack them as well. But for the most part, in order to attack them, you have to be in those squares. Unless you're using somebody like Hazen that has that AoE and you can do it from a distance.
And that's really where a lot of those characters start to get their value in, when you start using your archers and your wizards and stuff to kind of attack from a diagonal. And eventually Bowie will end up getting the bolt spell too, so you can start using him to attack diagonally.
I've got that.
If you use his bolt, you basically only have like 1 or 2 shots of that thing, and then you run out of magic.
Yeah, I noticed that if I use the bolt, I can't egress.
So while it's incredibly powerful, you have to be very tactical and mindful of your magic.
I just figured this is stupid, but Bowie has 2 spells and they're both running. Get it? Bolt and egress.
Terrible. So after the prison flower fight, you have another boss encounter. You have Gesp. And
Say
this
that
fight,
again.
it's Geshp, Gesp. So this fight is really straightforward. There's not really anything to it until about midway through the fight. Another hazard appears, a brand new one, and they're called burst rocks. And these are boulders that will just pop up randomly throughout the field and often very close to your characters. And they're on a timer and they will explode and it will kill that quote unquote enemy, but they will do a lot of damage to your party members. So while I thought they were annoying and kind of a pain in the ass, I really like that this game is constantly adding something new. There's always a new monster type, or there's things like the prison flowers or the burst rocks. This game doesn't just stick with the same characters the entire time, even though there is a little bit of palette swapping.
Even though buildings and towns might look the same, the enemies do not.
Yeah, they do a lot of really good work there when it comes to the combat. And that's the bulk of the game, I would say. So it makes sense that this is where they are spending the majority of their time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so far from what I was playing, I spent about 30 seconds in the town and then I'm gone.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think they did a really great job as far as like level design goes and everything, because even as basic as this game is, like just the way they kind of pair you up against enemies and terrain and everything, like it does kind of keep you on your toes more or less
Yeah,
throughout the
totally.
entirety of the game.
And and from what I've noticed so far, each single fight that I've done does not feel like a previous fight, like in any way. Like the terrain's
Yeah,
always
I
different.
would,
The
yeah,
enemy selection
I
is
would agree
different.
with that. Yeah,
Yeah, like each one is its own fight. I mean,
and
you can
they put
practice
in
strategy. Yeah,
they put in work with boss battles too. Like, you know, when you get to the Kraken, like it's this kind of cool water thing that you haven't dealt with before and stuff
yeah. I
like
was not
that. And
prepared for that.
I think they did really put a lot of work in. Like, as you were saying, you know, they were very heavily focused on the combat aspect of this.
I was not expecting a kraken in a river. By the way,
Well, that you should expect it because it got you.
I ended up getting it.
Oh, you did.
So the next part of the game requires some story progression here, and that's the Stone Devil's Head. And you can see it on the map, you can go to it, and I knew that it had something to do with progression, but I didn't know what or how, and I had to look it up. But while exploring this area, I did find the Evil Lance. There are other items throughout the game that are like the Evil Axe or the Evil Lance, and they're basically cursed items.
Yeah.
Anything? Okay. Well, I was
Obviously, I don't have any comment.
well, I was hoping that Cory would kind of
Oh,
work up and talk a little bit about these cursed items. I'd never used them because you just look at the stats and they weren't as good as what I was using before.
yeah. This thing is like I never really use the evil equipment.
Can you purify them or anything like that? Or
No, they're just
Okay.
spooky.
do they look cool? If they look cool,
No,
mean,
they don't even really look cool either.
I mean, like they have pretty high like stats on them as far as I recall, but like they like paralyze you and stuff. Like they're just not good.
Yeah, there's a random chance that you'll become paralyzed while using it.
Yeah, they're just garbage. I never really use them. It's like, oh
Can
yeah,
you-
there's that thing. Yeah, it sucks.
Will they paralyze you if they're in your inventory, or do you actually have to like
You have to have it
equip
equipped.
Equipped.
And each time you actually like go to swing it,
No, it's
it
like
has the
it's like
chance?
it's like the start of your round, if I recall. Like you.
So then
it's
what if-
like,
what if you kept it-
Always paralyzed.
I never used them, so I don't know.
so what if you try because like with Chester, I kept the lance and the arrow on him, and then whatever I needed to, I could switch between the two. Like you can move him around,
Right.
switch his weapon, and then attack. What if you do that with the evil stuff?
Well, why
Yeah, I
would
mean,
I
you're
want
wasting
to when
inventory.
I have a better weapon to begin with?
I thought you said the stats were good on it.
Well, yeah, but like I have a weapon of comparable
Oh,
like
so they're not
quality that doesn't
not
like.
like
Yeah, I mean it's like it's like 8 more attack or whatever, but it's 8 more attack, which also will have a chance to stun lock you. Like
Yeah,
it's
they
just
are not
Oh, yeah,
insanely
'cause-
powerful.
well, and actually, and that just makes me think why my idea wouldn't work, because then the next round you start off equipped with it and they could hit you. So
No, it's
Yeah, there's
just,
a major drawback to it.
yeah, it's basically like I think like the light sword or whatever, or the force sword is like 45 attack or whatever, and then the dark sword is like 50 attack, but then the dark sword also like will stun you, or it's like HP leech or some BS. It's just not good.
but if you have it in your hilt and you go into a bar, nobody's going to mess with you.
Yeah, there you go. No one's gonna touch me. I've got my magic devil sword.
After the Stone Devil's Head, we're actually nearing the end of the game here. And this next area, I have kind of mixed feelings about because it's a unique and visually interesting area, but it's the maze. If you don't know the path, it is a major pain in the ass. There are areas that you can climb up, and it's like chutes and ladders. You can end up on an area that is a chute, and it will drop you off, and you have to navigate again back through this maze. But once you learn it, you're good.
Now, are you fighting creatures through the whole thing or something?
I don't remember. I don't think so.
So it's
I
more just weird platforming.
Yeah, I think it's just all about the navigation of this level. After the maze, this is my favorite fight, and this is the Odd Eye fight. And Odd Eye is like the second in command to the big bad Xeon. The level is stunning, especially for a Sega Genesis game. The enemies are brutal. The level is constantly collapsing beneath you, which I thought was pretty unexpected. We hadn't seen that up to this point. And it actually took me 3 tries to complete this fight. And it's probably my favorite of the entire game. There's a lot of dialogue at this point where Odd Eye is kind of talking about why he had to do the things he did. And it's just something that you should definitely check out and play through. And it's a really rewarding fight once you finish it.
I'll be sure to get my way there.
Any
Odd
thoughts,
Eye
Cory?
is Odd Eye is actually he's a recurring character from earlier in the series too. So it's very kind of a sad thing to see.
When you say early in the series, do you mean early in the game? Because you see him early in the game.
He's in Shining Force Gaiden or whatever it is.
Okay.
So he's actually like one of your like playable allies earlier in the series, and he becomes like this minion for the Demon Lord in this one. So it's kind of a sad thing to see him like end up as a bad guy.
That's really interesting.
Oh.
Yep, because he used to be Adler like in the other game. So
Ah, okay. So right after you beat Odd Eye, it moves basically immediately into the boss fight. And unless you have previous knowledge, like you did, Cory, to me, impossible. There's no way to go from Odd Eye fight, where most of your party gets crushed, to go straight to the Xeon.
yeah,
I had to back up, I had to heal everybody,
well, now are you
resurrect
talking
everyone.
about the Xeon fight or like the King Gallum portion?
I kind of lumped it together.
Okay, all right.
So if you want, take over this area because I just kind of have it from the perspective of the Xeon fight.
After you beat Odd, you go into like the Tower of the Ancients, which is like this filler thing where you're kind of climbing up, and then you end up in like the big final room where you have to beat King Gallum, and then
And there's no save points or no priests in between.
no, there's no like business there. And then after you get King Gallum down, like Xeon pops out, and then he starts just wrecking your business basically.
Yeah,
And
nearly my
it's not
entire
fun.
party was dead when I arrived. So I just let him kill me, so that way I could resurrect everybody and try again with a full party.
Yeah, and I mean one of the only benefits is that like Xeon doesn't move. He just kind of hangs out at like the top of the map. But he does use like demon breath, which just completely ruins like anyone in radius of it. And
And he's
yeah,
really
it's
fast.
yeah, and he's incredibly fast too. So he ends up getting like in your rotation much more than you do. Which is really like where like Karna and Sarah come into play a lot of this. Like you really need to like buff your party before you start trying to get this guy toe to toe because he will just ruin your day.
So initially, this is where I gave up because I tried over and over and over again to beat Xeon, could not beat him. And fortunately for me, but unfortunately for Chris, while you were trying to finish the game, I was like, man, I would just hear you talk about your progression. I'm like, man, I got to go back and try again. And I went back. I just repeated the same fight over and over and over again. And eventually, I made the right combination of moves to beat the game. But it took me forever. And I think a lot of that is because, like I said early on, I was going as quickly as I could through this game. And so I never found a lot of these secret upgrades. I didn't complete maps. I would just go and defeat the big boss, and then that would end the encounter because I was trying to get through the game.
Yeah, and I think playing, and I mean we've kind of talked about how you've done this before too, like where you're just trying to get it done for time. But I think like really speed running the game has kind of been to your detriment for this one because there is so much like extracurricular stuff you can do. Like we really haven't touched on the fact that like we've mentioned it so far, but mithril is an item in the game, and you end up finding like 6 pieces or so throughout the game. And to use mithril, you have to collect this thing from a fireplace, which will allow you to open up like the secret dwarven city. And then they will use the mithril to create some like high level weapons for you. And so, like, there's a lot of like just little hidden things like that. And if you didn't spend the time to unlock all that stuff, like you're kind of at a disadvantage.
I had none of that.
Yeah,
So
exactly. So you're kind of using
please,
like the baseline, like vendor items and all that sort of thing.
yeah. So please tell me, where is this dwarven city and how do you access it?
Wait,
So,
wait, wait.
what?
So, Sean, did you not get the cave where you helped the dwarves?
No,
See, even I found that, man.
I was trying to get this done quickly as possible because I thought we were going to cover this like 2 months ago.
My bad, y'all.
Yeah, so there's a dwarven town on Grand Island, and that's the starting island basically. So you really don't get back to it until you like are near the end of the game. And then you have to like get this item out of a fireplace from this like dwarven thing that Break's talking about where you save the dwarves, and you loot this thing from a fireplace, and you use the dry stone on the river to create a bridge which opens up a pathway to the dwarven village. And it's like this little discolored spot of forest that you can see on the map. And after you put the dry
That's
stone
kind of how the
down,
Elven town was too.
yeah, after you put the dry stone down and make the bridge, you can go to the dwarven village, and it will open up this little town you can go into, and there's vendors in there that will take your mithril and turn it into special weapons.
And are they like
They're pretty powerful.
okay?
Yeah.
What you would
Um
think of in any game with a mithril dwarven
yeah,
weapon?
yeah, exactly. You can like make the crit sword as a dwarven weapon, for example, and it like increases your chance to critical strike. And then there's like the mist javelin and like the buster shot and like the hyper cannon, and there's a couple of magical mithril items like I mentioned earlier, like the heat axe, where it'll allow you to cast like blaze 2 from the weapon. So there's a bunch of like crazy stuff like that.
So, Cory, unless you have something more to add at this point,
I
or
got a quick
everybody
question.
else, go ahead.
Okay, so thinking of my Kiwi who's having a hard time leveling up. If I gave him, oh wait, he can't do weapons. Never mind.
Well, you give him the jewelry.
Well, okay, honest, but on, if he's low level, like say he's got some piece of jewelry that casts Blaze 2, would his Blaze 2 deal the same amount of damage that Kaizen's Blaze 2 would deal, even if
No,
Kaizen's...
I believe it's static from the item. Like I think the item has a stat weight to it. So
I mean, him using a Blaze 2 item would be the same as anybody else using Blaze 2 item?
yeah, I believe so.
Cool. So even if he was behind, he could still be useful.
Yeah.
So, Cory, do you have anything more before I spoil the ending?
No, except for I have the ending, which you apparently did not get to.
And we will get to that in a second. So, like I said earlier, I eventually gave up, couldn't beat Xeon, and I decided I'm at the end of the game. Theoretically, I'd beat this boss. And so I just went and watched the ending on YouTube. And it is weird as hell. Spoiler for anybody, if you're interested in how this game ends, do not listen from this point on in the podcast. That said, it starts off with a fake out. Surprise, he's not dead. Instead of the boss dying, he just keeps on burning Lemon over and over and over again. Princess Ellis doesn't revive, which I initially thought was going to be sequel bait, but then another character that you encountered throughout the game by the name of Goddess Metula, she shows up and tell you that the princess is in a coma, but she will survive. She's been poisoned, and when her face turns pink, the poison has left her body, but she will require a kiss from her true love to awaken. 2 years pass, and the color finally returns to her face. You're summoned, you enter the king's court, and you see everyone you've met over the course of your adventure, and for some reason, there's a discussion, like a debate, as to who is going to kiss this girl. Jaha even tries to shoot a shot, but he's shot down. Everyone agrees that it must be Bowie, and Sarah gets flustered and runs away, the implication being that she's had feelings for Bowie the entire time.
Oh, I thought she wanted to do the kiss.
You know, I didn't even think about that, but that's kind of my
I'm kidding,
point.
it is 93.
Is that, yeah, and Japan still doesn't recognize same-sex marriages, so you're right. But that's kind of my point about what I was saying earlier, where some of the character interaction would have been nice to kind of flesh out the story, because at this point, there's zero indication that Sarah has any type of romantic feelings for Bowie.
Well, I think at the very, 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 very beginning of the game, they kind of seem like they're elementary school crushes or whatever. But
well,
I mean,
I forgot there's 35
yeah.
hours.
Yeah, exactly, and there's no plot building.
Yeah, like it does kind of leave a little bit desired, the fact that like you have this caravan where you can like go to the Shining Force Hall and talk to all your buddies, and none of them really have more to say to you other than like the basic little like chat blurb over and over when you talk to them. So it does kind of suck that there's that aspect of it. But
every time you enter battle, Sarah is always standing directly next to Bowie.
But I mean, I don't know if that's true, but
no,
like
I made
it's just I think it's just one of those things where it's like, once again, we thought that they really didn't have much faith in this title, and they cut the budget for it, and they had a whole new crew of developers that had to put this together, and I think there were just aspects of it that kind of fell by the wayside, and timetable issues and game space issues. I think I think if this was made on like a PlayStation, we would have seen much more of that get flushed out later, but I think that I really couldn't expect more from the time frame that we had.
That's fair. So after Sarah runs off, Bowie makes his way upstairs, and an image appears of him leaning over and kissing her. Roll credits, that's it.
What?
Post credits, you get some dialogue from the witch you meet at the title screen, and she's been transformed back to her true form, and she's been released from whatever curse has held her. But apparently, there's more that I knew nothing about. So, Cory, this is now your time to shine.
Yep. So if you watch the credits through to the end, and then after the whole thing with the witch's secret and everything, it fades to black, and then you'll see that the jewels of light and darkness come up on the screen, and it says like Finn in the corner, and then it will say like this is it and more, and then you can like press the C button and you will be teleported to the secret final battle, which is like Xeon, King Gallum, Odd Eye, Gesh, Lemon, Camille, like all the bosses you fought so far are on this map now, and you get to fight all the bosses at once. And
Is that like
the
doable?
yeah, it is. It's really hard. But all the bosses are on this one map, and it's kind of this like underground terrain kind of floating out in space. And if you look at the overall map, it's actually in the shape of Sonic the Hedgehog.
That's
And
awesome.
you end up fighting like all these monsters at the end. And then if you beat everything, you get like the final game over splash page. So
What
that's
happens
the
if you
little
die?
secret at the back. You just lose. It's not a big deal.
I mean, but I mean, like in all the other fights, if you die, you go to the priest and you get
Oh
revived in
yeah,
a town.
it just I think it just puts you back to the like
Square
game.
one with the fight.
Yeah, like it just puts you back to like the game screen to load your game from.
Wait, so you only have one chance to beat this final secret?
I don't remember. I did it like a month and a half ago, but yeah, like I had to do it twice and I lost, and so I just kind of set the game down, and then when I came back, I just loaded it up from like the last encounter. So I could not tell you,
So that
but
wraps it up.
that
That's
is the
the
little secret fight there.
that's the whole game. We discussed the entire 35 plus hours. Let's take a quick break, and when we return, we'll do our final segment where we share our final thoughts. Stick around. Welcome back, everyone. This is our last segment where we're going to share our final thoughts. Chris, why don't you start off?
I totally plan on finishing this game. I'm just gonna keep chipping away at it. It's a great game. It's super nostalgic, 90s, awesome early RPG. I mean, early like, you know what I mean. But yeah, no, I like the combat mechanics and the team building and all that stuff. And yeah, I totally plan on keep playing it. And I definitely, any RPG fans out there, I would definitely recommend playing this game. It's great. And thank you for the great suggestion of playing it, Cory.
Well, I'm glad you guys more or less enjoyed it.
Yeah, I definitely did, but what are your thoughts?
My thoughts, I love this game. Like I said, it's a very much a nostalgic childhood classic for me. Playing through it again, I really enjoyed it. One thing we really didn't talk about this episode is the music, and the music in this game is very short and repetitive. That being
I can
said,
only think of one
I
song.
I still really love the music in this game. Like it's very much just a like high fantasy, like like it's just fun.
Yeah,
It's just fun and like very amped up. And
that totally plays into like what I was talking about, like the '90s nostalgia,
yes,
just
it's yeah.
fantasy. Like
And I
it is.
mean,
The
I really
focus was really on the graphical aspect of this game,
yeah, the music
not
was more or
so much
less
the
of an
music.
afterthought. Yeah, but it's just even as it is, as cheap it is, it's just really a fun couple sets of riffs that you hear over and over again, and they're enjoyable to me. But yeah, I love the characters in this game. Kiwi is by far the best character. You can fight me on that one.
Because he's a
He's
turtle.
more or less the strongest character in the game, next to like Peter or Shining Force 1 Domingo, if any of you have played Shining Force 1 out there. Um, but yeah, like I really love this game, and I would recommend it for any like RPG lover. If you like Shining Force, or not Shining Force, if you like Fire Emblem, like Shining Force is definitely in the same vein of a tactical RPG, and it's very enjoyable to me. And the graphics are fun, the story's whatever, but the gameplay and just little like adventure of it all is just very much something that I love.
All excellent points. It's definitely something that I'm glad to have played. I may not have enjoyed this so much when I was younger, but as an adult, I can really play it and enjoy the experience, and I can appreciate the game for what it is today and what it would have been back in 1993 or 94 when it came out. I've never played any of the other titles in the series, but that's probably going to change because there's some video game news I want to mention right here. The Sega Genesis Mini 2, because there's already been a Sega Genesis Mini 1, the full game list has been revealed. The system will launch October 27th of this year. One of the interesting things about the Mini 2 is that it's going to include both Sega Genesis games and Sega CD games. It will
Sega
also
CD.
it will also include some titles that have never before been released. I believe that this has been ported by M2. But to tie the Mini 2 to the show, why I mentioned it is that some of the games that are included are Shining Force 2, which we just played, Shining in the Darkness, which we mentioned is the very first game in the series. It will also
Just
have
wildly different, by the way. It's like a dungeon crawler.
it will also include Shining Force CD, which is Shining Force Gaiden 1 and 2. So
Oh,
if you
cool. Okay.
so if you pick up Sega Genesis Mini 2, you will have access to 4 different Shining Force games. And on the Sega Genesis Mini 1, it has the original, or I shouldn't say the original, but it has Shining Force, which is the second game in the series.
So
So that,
confusing.
yeah,
So,
that's a
so
mouthful.
Shining Force is the second Shining Force game, and Shining Force 2 is the fifth Shining Force game.
Correct.
Yes.
And Shining Force CD is the
Like
sixth
Third
90.
game?
and fourth.
It's like this
Oh,
47. And I will say I played this on the Sega Genesis Master Collection as well. It is available on Steam. I did have this also on like the Wii store. I don't believe the Wii store is functional anymore, so
it's not,
It is
yeah,
not.
sadly.
you can't get it there anymore. But Shining Force 1 and 2 are on the Sega Master Collection, as well as I believe Shinobi 3 is on there. It's either 2 or 3, but you can play Shinobi on there as well as a bunch of other great titles we have yet to cover. So if you guys are looking for Genesis titles, the
Oh,
Sega Master Collection is like it's like $15 or something, and it's great. So get out there and get it.
And there's a lot
uh,
of quality and life improvements too. Like I mentioned earlier, the fast forward, and it also includes
yeah.
rewind.
Oh yes, there are options like that, and there are it's very like retro feeling too, because like when you boot it up, like you can actually play it like where it shows it on a TV screen if you want to be a weirdo and play it like that. But
On a
it's a
TV
very
screen within a
yeah
TV screen?
yeah it's like a CRT with the console sitting underneath it. It's very much like a little 3D thing for you to play with, but it's a good game if you're looking for Sega Genesis titles. Like I
Now,
really recommend the Master Collection.
Yeah, I recommend any feature that has a fast forward. Trust me.
Yeah, that's one of the major quality of life improvements in this game that makes it a lot more manageable this day and age. So, guys, I think that wraps everything up. For those of you out there, you can follow us on Twitter at ReviewBite. That's Bite with a Y. You can find us on iHeartRadio. We're also on YouTube. I upload all the episodes there. We have a Discord server. Our next game is going to be.
Our next game, viewers at home.
It's Street Fighter 2.
Chaos Team, baby!
Oh, with that laugh.
Chris,
Ugh.
Cory, thank you so much for playing this game. Chris, I know you're still plugging away at it. Cory, thank you so much for recommending
Oh,
this game.
Thanks for having me go play Shining Force and McDonald's Treasure Land Adventures.
You, the listener, thank you. And I want to make a special note of our new Canadian listeners. So our last episode, which was Doom, as soon as I uploaded that, within the first hour, there was a massive influx of downloads from Canada.
Interesting.
I don't know why. I don't know how. I don't care. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this
When
show.
you say massive, you mean like 37,000?
Not 37,000, but it
like
was
7. There were like 7 guys in Canada that immediately wanted to hear about Doom.
it was quite a bit larger than our normal influx for the very first, day that the episodes are up. Thank you once again, and we will see you next time. Bye.